Just, that's a,
Love?
yes, well, we won't call, that's just,
We know what you meant.
yeah, but, I mean, just think about where we've been with David and we got Amnon and Tamar, and now we have Absalom, and her brother, and Amnon, and Absalom's plan for revenge, so just kind of wanted to go through some of that, and now we're on chapter 14, which is Joab's plan. And it says, I'll just read it. Now Joab, the son of Zeruiah, perceived that the king's heart was toward Absalom. And Joab sent to Tekoa and fetched thence a wise woman, and said unto her, I pray thee, feign thyself to be a mourner, and pour on now mourning apparel, and anoint not thyself with oil, but be as a woman that had a long time mourned for the dead. And come to the king and speak on this matter unto him. So Joab put the words in her mouth. A little manipulation, it sounds like. And when the woman of Tekoa spake to the king, she fell on her face to the ground and did obeisance and said, Help, O king. And the king said unto her, What aileth thee? And she answered, I am indeed a widow woman, and mine husband is dead. And thy handmaid had 2 sons, and they strove together in the field, and there was none to part them, but the one smote the other and slew him. And behold, the whole family is risen against thine handmaid, and they said, Deliver him that smote his brother, that we may kill him for the life of his brother whom he slew, and we will destroy the heir also, and they shall quench my coal which is left, and shall not leave to mine husband neither name nor remainder upon the earth. And the king said unto the woman, Go to thine house, and I will give charge concerning thee. And the woman of Tekoa said unto the king, My lord, O king, the iniquity be on me, and on my father's house, and the king and his throne be guiltless. And the king said, Whosoever saith unto thee, Bring him to me, and he shall not touch thee any more. Then said she, I pray thee, let the king remember the Lord thy God, and that thou wouldest not suffer the revengers of blood to destroy any more, lest they destroy my son. And he said, As the Lord liveth, there shall not one hair of thy son fall to the earth. And I will pause there because Pastor Paul is back.
No.
He wants you to finish.
Oh,
You can finish.
okay, I will keep reading.
I'll wait.
All right.
Saving my voice.
Changing his voice.
All right, that's fine with me. Then the woman said, Let thine handmaid, I pray thee, speak one word unto my lord the king. And he said, Say on. And the woman said, Wherefore then hast thou such a thing against the people of God? For the king doth speak this thing as one which is faulty, in that the king doth not fetch home again his banished. For we must needs die, and are as water spilt on the ground, which cannot be gathered up again. Neither doth God respect any person, yet doth he devise means, that his banished be not expelled from him. Now therefore that I am come to speak of this thing unto my lord the king, it is because the people have made me afraid, and thy handmaid said, I will now speak unto the king. It may be that the king will perform the request of his handmaid. For the king will hear to deliver his handmaid out of the hand of the man that would destroy me and my son together out of the inheritance of God. Then thine handmaid said, The word of my lord the king shall now be comfortable. For as an angel of God, so it is my lord the king to discern good and bad. Therefore the Lord thy God will be with thee. Then the king answered and said unto the woman, Hide not from me, I pray thee, the thing that I shall ask thee. And the woman said, Let my lord the king now speak. And the king said, It is not the hand of Joab with thee in all this. And the woman answered and said, As thy soul liveth, my lord, the king, none can turn to the right hand or to the left from aught that my lord the king hath spoken. For thy servant Joab, he bade me, and he put all these words in my mouth of thy handmaid, to fetch about this form of speech, hath thy my servant Joab done this thing, and my Lord is wise, according to the wisdom of an angel of God, to know all things that are in the earth. And the king said unto Joab, Behold now, I have done this thing. Go therefore, bring the young man Absalom again. And Joab fell to the ground on his face, and bowed himself, and thanked the king. And Joab said, Today thy servant knoweth that I have found grace in thy sight, my lord, O king, in that the king hath fulfilled the request of his servant. So Joab arose and went to Geshur, and brought Absalom to Jerusalem. And the king said, Let him turn to his own house, and let him not see my face. So Absalom returned to his house, and saw not the king's face. But in all Israel there was none to be so much praised as Absalom for his beauty. For the sole of his feet, even to the crown of his head, there was no blemish in him. And when he polled his head, for it was at every year's end that he polled it, because the hair was heavy on him, therefore he polled it. He weighed the hair of his head, and 200 shekels after the king's weight. And unto Absalom there were born 3 sons and 1 daughter, whose name was Tamar. She was a woman of fair countenance. So Absalom dwelt two full years in Jerusalem, and saw not the king's face. Therefore Absalom sent for Joab to have sent him to the king, but he would not come to him. And when he sent again the second time, he would not come. Therefore he said unto his servants, See, Joab's field is near mine, and he hath barley there. Go and set it on fire. And Absalom's servants set the field on fire. Then Joab arose, came to Absalom unto his house, and said unto him, Wherefore have thy servants set my field on fire? And Absalom answered Joab, Behold, I have sent unto thee, saying, Come hither, that I may send thee to the king, to say, Wherefore am I to come from Geshur? It had been good for me to have been there still. Now therefore let me see the king's face, and if there be any iniquity in me, let him kill me. So Joab came to the king and told him, and when he had called for Absalom, he came to the king, bowed himself on his face to the ground before the king, and the king kissed Absalom. My goodness.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah. There's a lot in that chapter.
It's a long chapter.
that's a long chapter. There's a lot of, it's kind of a tongue twister sometimes.
Well, thank you,
Well, you
Chuck.
bet, yes. You bet, yeah.
Good job, Chuck.
Yeah, you bet.
Thank you for
And our guest reader for
Well, it's
tonight.
all for the Lord.
thank you for doing that. Just an update. John and Joyce are headed home because they want to be close to family. Then they're going to go visit the family. So
How far do they have to go, Pastor?
Chino, yeah, not far.
Denise is in China.
Okay. Thank you, Chuck. That was good reading. Now, let me begin by just giving some ideas here about learning. Okay, isn't it interesting that this is the second time somebody has approached David with a scenario?
Right.
Yes.
Some people learn better by scenarios than just straight logic.
Yeah.
Okay, and the Hebrews were storytellers. That's why Jesus told so many parables. He told parables. What would that do? Well, you connect with something you know, and that helps you to understand something that you didn't know. In other words, you transfer what you understand about this earthly example, seed falling on the ground, whatever, And then you go, oh, I understand that. Oh, now that helps me understand something else.
Yeah.
And that's what learning is, by the way. Learning is always going from the known to the unknown. You have to connect to some kind of known. Okay, you all following me here? So this is the way a lot of people learn. When I was in college, I studied, or in my studies, I studied linguistics. And one of the things that baffles people that study languages is what they call language acquisition. In other words, everything that you learn and I learn, we have to be able to connect some way with it to make understanding, to move to the unknown. But when a baby enters the world, everything that a baby hears is nonsense. Did you ever know that? They don't have language ability. They hear nonsense. And so out of all that noise, it's just noise to a baby. Out of all that noise, they have to somehow attach meaning to the sounds. How do they do that? Okay? And it's interesting when people try to explain, well, how that happens. Because if you don't have what we call pre-wired, if you're not pre-wired in your brain to be able to do that, there's no way to do that. In other words, if I were to sit here right now and I would say to you, esto es para usted, esto es para usted, and I keep saying that, esto es para usted. Now that's Spanish, and if you don't speak Spanish, it's nonsense. But if I go, esto es para usted, esto es para usted, what am I doing? I'm now using body motions. You're watching my face. Well, that's what a baby has to do. A baby has to listen to nonsense and watch the language of motion, expressions, and that's how they begin to understand. Okay, so babies have an amazing ability to take nonsense and make sense out of it. And I believe God has put that in their brain, because other than that, it's just nonsense. And so all I'm saying is learning is a very interesting thing, and language acquisition is even more exciting because babies are able to pick up things. And people would say to me, oh, Spanish is so hard. And I would say, it wasn't hard. I was 5 years old when I learned it. You know? It was easy for me. Well, you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
At 5, your brain is like a sticky pad on a fly trap. It's catching everything that comes by and making sense out of it. Yeah, David.
I speak to my grandson, 18 months old, in
Yes.
Spanish.
Yes.
Okay.
Everything he hears from me is Spanish, but he still has to also learn English, because
Right.
everybody else is talking.
Right.
Yeah. Well, that's perfect, because
Right.
that'll be so useful to him.
Yeah, I have both of them.
So useful to him.
Good for you. We learned in teaching elementary school children that there's a certain time that language is acquired,
Yeah.
that your brain is wired, like you said, to do it, and then it kind of starts getting harder
Yeah.
after a certain period of time. And I was teaching in first grade, and I'd have bilingual kids, Hispanic kids that would pick it up right away, and then they'd teach another kid.
Yes.
And it was amazing. They could just go back and forth, and they'd bring their parents in and translate,
Oh,
you
yes.
know,
Yeah.
because they
Yeah.
it was just
Automatic for them.
If they had been taught language in their own language, like stories and talked to and everything, then they could pick it up in a different language. But if
Yeah.
they hadn't been talked to, which I had some kids like that had not been talked, well, they had been talked at,
Yes.
but they had not had conversations, then we had to start out, they didn't know how conversations worked.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'm sorry.
No, that's good.
It's true though. It's just,
So think
Gary
about it.
Smalley in his, I think it's Gary Smalley, in some of his like marriage seminars and books, talks about using a story or setting a scenario to get a message across to our spouses or to our teenagers, whoever we're trying to communicate with. Do you remember that principle, similar, but you make it more pithy, not this whole story. Like if I go and if I want you to organize something, I'll say, well, just picture Home Depot. Put this picture in your mind of the aisles of Home Depot, and here's plumbing, and here's electrical, and they're all labeled. So everybody going in there can find them. And that's what you want in your garage. So, that's a message that I want to get across. And I put a picture with it, a story. Like you're going into Home Depot.
So what was fun, just today and yesterday, two of my Hispanic boys were trying to figure out when they first met. And finally they said, we don't have a story about that. And I've been trying to get across to them the importance of literature.
Oh, it's awesome.
And so I've got that example.
Look at that, that's sunk in.
We don't have a story about that.
That's awesome, that's really sunk in.
That's good. Good stuff.
All right, so here's what we have. We have David, an adult, having to learn some lessons. And the best way he learned was through examples. And so remember when he had committed the sin with Bathsheba 2 chapters back, Nathan the prophet came, remember, and told him a story. Now, it could be that it was true. We don't know. He just said there was a man and he had one lamb, remember? And then there was a rich man who had a lot of lambs, but he took the poor man's only lamb, and David goes, that man should die. And he should, but before he dies, he should repay 4 times, remember? Because you had to repay for what you had stolen. And then Nathan goes, okay, you're the man, right? You're the man. And it hit David like, oh, yes, I did take somebody's. I have how many wives of my own? And I went and took this guy's only wife. So I'm the one that stole the lamb. He put the connection. It connected. So what he knew about that story and that man should be judged now was transferred over to him, and he goes, oh, I guess that's me. So I am the one who committed the evil. All right. And it worked. David realized, he repented, but what did God say? The sword will never depart from your house, right? And you're going to have problems. And the baby that's going to be born is going to die. So there were consequences to his sin, even though he repented. And we have Psalm 51 to tell us that. He repented. All right. So now we have another problem that comes up. And that is that Absalom, remember in the previous chapter, he has killed his brother for what the brother did to his sister. And so we've got Absalom basically living in a foreign country. He's over in the land of the Geshurites. The Geshurites were the Canaanites. There are people that lived in the land that were never removed. When we get to the book of Joshua, Manasseh, the tribe of Manasseh, did not drive them out. So what happens is then those people became a thorn in their flesh. So this is a foreign tribe living in their area that were never kicked out. However, Absalom has a connection, all right? Because one of David's wives was the princess of Jeshur. She was the daughter of the king of the Geshurites. So Absalom basically went over to stay with his relatives for how many years? 2 years, I think he was.
Yeah.
So if you look at chapter 13, verse 38, Absalom fled and went to Jeshur.
3 years.
And, he was there 3 years. You're right. And the soul of David, this is 39. Everybody see it? 1339. And the soul of David longed to go to Absalom, for he was comforted concerning Amnon. Interesting. What's going on here? Well, David's son, Absalom, is now in exile. And so what did God say was going to happen? The sword. There'd be division and chaos in his family. Well, here we have his son living in exile among a heathen tribe, and David can't see his own son. And it says he longed to go to Absalom. So when we get to chapter 14, Joab comes up with a plan. Now there's differences and there's similarities in this story. I'm going to talk about a couple differences. In the first story that Nathan told, it could have been true. We don't know. He just said there was a man, remember, who had one lamb. There was another man. Could have been true. And David, as the chief judicial branch of Israel, he was the one who would try the cases. He passed judgment and said that one who stole should die. In this case, Joab makes up a story. It's a little bit different. Okay? Verse 2, he sent to Tekoa, and he got a woman there who was wise, and he told her what to say, and he told her how to dress. Okay, now, is it right to make up a story and play a part to get someone's attention? I don't know.
Yeah.
Talk about it with me. What?
Pretty chancy for that woman, because at any moment the king could say, off with her head.
Yeah.
But
Or-
is it wrong? I don't know that it's wrong. It's not like they're going to leave
No.
him in confusion.
Call it an illustration.
They know that they're going to explain it to him.
Yeah.
But as she presented it, it was a lie.
Yes.
Yeah, it was a
That's one
fabricated story. However, you need to ask the question, is this what it took to get David's attention? You know, Joab is trying to, here's what he's trying to do. He's trying to fix it. He's trying to fix the division in the family. Because Absalom has killed somebody, right? He orchestrated the death of Amnon, invited him to this party.
Right.
That's in the previous chapter. And he had him killed. He is guilty. He is a guilty murderer.
Right.
He's living in exile.
Right.
So it's the age-old question, does the ends justify the
Right,
means?
right.
Yeah.
And I think in this case, the Bible tells what is. It just tells Joab made up the story, and here's what he did. God doesn't pass judgment on Joab either way.
So there are no other results other than Absalom comes back.
Right. That's the only one.
Has he already tried to be the king yet?
Not yet.
No.
Oh.
He
That's
will
later.
be soon.
That's later.
Yeah. So my question then was, is it right or wrong? I don't think we can go there. We just have to say this is what Joab did. He got a woman who was wise from Tekoa. Now what's interesting is this is not close to Jerusalem. This is, I think, about 10 miles below Bethlehem, south. So I think here's why he did it. Because when this woman came to David, see, the king was open to widows and the people who had been mistreated. And so here comes a widow. Who's not going to listen to a widow who comes and tells about that her two boys were in the field and they fought and one of them killed the other one in the family? You know the story, right? Chuck read it. The story is the family wants to hold the murderer responsible, but she says, but if they take the life of my only son that's left, I won't have any inheritance. They're my only kids. So, what's David say? Well, let me go back. So she comes to David with this story, and David has to pass judgment on it and say, here's what needs to be done. All right, so you see the facts here. Two boys fighting in the field, or fighting, and one kills the other one. So legally, the murderer should be killed. But then, if that happens, she doesn't have any kids. Now, remember the story about the kinsman redeemer?
Yeah.
David's own grandmother, great-grandmother, I don't know, I'll have to look at it, Ruth, was a Moabitess who was brought into the line of Israel because Boaz, the kinsman redeemer, took her and raised up seed to her family. And that was in the Word of God, that if a woman didn't have, let's say her son died and she had no other heir, or let's say her husband died and she had no way of having more kids, the brother of that husband would take her, and the first kid would have the name of the father who died. Are you following me here?
Yeah.
Not trying to be too complicated, but
Right.
kinsman redeemer.
Yeah.
Now you ask the question, how come in this case she couldn't have just had a kinsman redeemer? Why couldn't they have passed judgment on that son who murdered? David could have said this. Here's what he could have said. You know, I hear your case, ma'am. I hear that you're a widow. I hear that you only have one son left, but he is a murderer, so he has to pay the penalty. However, in the law of God, there is what we call kinsman redeemer. In fact, my great-grandmother was saved that way. She was married to Boaz, and so I know that happened in my family. He could have maybe said, why don't you look around and see if your husband, because you say you're a widow, if your husband had a brother or family member who could take you as a wife and raise up kids in your husband's name. Are you all following me here?
Well, except for what if she's too old?
Well,
Yeah, because we're talking adult sons.
we are, and there is a clue here. Sarah, you were talking about clues in stories, right? Let me show you a clue. Because part of what she says to the king, let me see if I can find it. Let's see. She says something about, verse 7. When she's talking to David, look at the clue. Behold, the whole family is risen against thy handmaid. And they said, deliver him that smote his brother, that we may kill him. For the life of his brother whom he slew, and we will destroy the heir also. And so they shall quench my coal which is left, and shall not leave to my husband neither name or remain. The clue is this. She's claiming before David, I have nothing left. I'm like a little ember that just has still a little bit of heat. And if they take my son, it'll go out. It seems to indicate that she was older and she couldn't have kids. Y'all following me here? That maybe that was a way of her saying, he's my only hope. I don't have hope in having another kid down the road.
Yeah.
All right.
But
So
in 19, she comes forth and tells the truth that
that's true.
Joab put all these words in
Right,
my mouth.
right.
So none of the story is true.
Well, that's true.
That's
That's true. But it was all what Joab told her to say to get the judgment. Now, here's what the judgment was for. Think about it. The example of this widow would be applied to Absalom. Are you all following me here? The example of her, when David passed judgment and said, that living son will not be touched. He will remain alive. I won't let anybody touch him. What he was doing was he was pardoning him, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
He would no longer be killed for murdering his brother.
Right.
So that story brought out a judgment from David, which then could be applied to his own son, Absalom.
Although the situation is quite different with Absalom, because David had plenty of other kids.
That's true. That's true. So there are differences and there's
But
similarities.
There's similarities.
But the key is that David realized, well, when he made the judgment, and Luann, you were, which verse was that where she,
19.
oh, yeah, verse 19. David's smart. He wasn't born yesterday, okay? And right after he pronounces his judgment and says, no one's going to touch that son. Then he goes, verse 19, is this the hand of Joab? Like, does Joab have something to do with this?
Well, the woman had said something else to him that made him suspicious.
Okay, what's that?
Um,
Do you see it?
Well, I don't remember. Let's see. Now, therefore, I've come to present this matter to my Lord. I don't know. She kept talking in circles.
Yeah, she did speak a lot.
Yeah.
She used a lot of words. That's true. She said in verse 15 that it's because the people have made me afraid. In other words, I came running to you, King, because this is beyond me. I need your help.
It's just like methinks you protest too much.
Yeah.
She just kept talking, and I think it made him suspicious.
Yeah. So in verse 19, he says, is this Joab's doing? And the woman answered, No, Joab had nothing to do with it. No, 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 no,
I know what it
no.
is.
You
No.
got me.
It's on chapter 13, because what she says is, wherefore then hast thou thought such a thing against the people of God? For the king doth speak this thing as one which is
Yes.
faulty, in that king doth not fetch home again his banished.
Yeah,
So right there, she puts it right in his face. You didn't bring your son home.
yeah. Well, she took her story and applied it to him.
So obviously, at that point, he would probably become suspicious.
Yeah. I mean, she's being pretty bold, by the way.
Yeah.
She's speaking to the king, folks. And she's saying, okay, you judged in my case. My son will live even though he's a murderer. What about your son?
Uh-huh.
The one that you won't let come back into the country? The one that's banished? He should be pardoned too.
It's a well-made plan, because they start by having her dress
Yeah.
Yeah.
as a
Right.
mourner.
Right.
Speaking on the side of a widow, we are promised in the Bible that people will take care of the widows and the orphans.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen, but yes, and this would be something very strong that she could do. And
Yeah.
he's using a person from so far away, because the story can't really be checked.
That's right. That's what I was getting at by Tekoa is pretty far away. You know, if this happened in Jerusalem, David would probably go, how come I didn't know about this?
Yeah.
You know, two boys fighting in the field and one kills each other. Jerusalem's not that big. I would have known about this, but no, she's from way far away. So Joab invented the story. Let's just all be in agreement. Invented the story, got someone to play the part, right? It reminds me of what happened a couple years ago, many years ago. Our home church back in Pennsylvania, they were contacted by a company who promised that if we, and I was on the elder board at the time, if we invested in this company, if we took some money and invested, then there was a huge return on this, because it was a Christian organization that was letting churches use money, and we would have a great return. And one of our elders met with the representatives. They sounded great. They had testimonials from this other church, you know, and so our church went ahead and loaned this organization money. It turned out to be a total scam. These guys were paid actors. It totally blew us away. We did not, now we didn't give a whole lot. I think we only gave like 3,000 or something. So it wasn't like, but we thought, here's a reputable organization that had good testimonials, and we had a little bit of money in the bank, and we could, rather than have it in the bank, we could give it to this Christian organization who promised a return on it. We checked it out. Everything sounded good. Remember Mark Hazeltine? He's the one that, one of our elders, and this guy's brilliant. He's a PhD, and he met with them, and he was totally blown. He thought these guys were real. When it came out, what the guy was doing was he was taking money from churches who said they were investing, and then he was paying off here, and he never produced, never. So we lost our money. We never got it back. All that to say, this happens, folks. There are people that play parts. You know what they're called in the Bible? They're called hypocrites. Hypocrite is an actor, one who wears a mask to play a part. You know, the Greeks, just a minute, the Greeks used the word hypocrite, not in a bad way. Hypocrite was an actor. When you went on the stage, you wore a mask. You weren't really a prince, but you dressed up with one and you played out a drama. That's what hypocrite means. Now, in the Bible, it's used to describe someone who's deceiving, who's not real. Okay, are you all following me here? But we tend to wear masks, don't we? I mean, we're looking at this woman, we're going, how could she do that to the king? Have we ever been genuine, or have we ever worn a mask or tried to deceive someone else, making them think we are something we're not? Oh no. Okay, Chuck, you had your
I was just, I was going to ask how often was it that widows got a
Got a hearing?
audience with the king? Is that unusual?
No, I don't think it's unusual. I think, but only like we were saying, widows are special cases. God told us to take care of the widows and the orphans. And so they could have a special hearing. Yeah. If they insisted, they could go right to the top. Yeah. So, playing a part. This woman played a part, and she did it well.
She was bolder than most women.
I think so.
I would think so, yeah. But remember, she had Joab behind her.
Yeah.
I mean, he's the general. He's the guy in charge of the whole military. So he's putting her up to this, and I'm pretty sure he probably said, "Hey, I'll have your back. Just go do this, look this way, and then I'll step in." Maybe he was waiting around the corner. You know what I mean? He was standing there waiting to jump in, say if anything was going wrong. "Hey, David, stop! You know, it's just a drama, David." Go
Shakespeare
ahead.
sure written a play about this.
Yeah.
He did twice remind us that she was wise.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you'd think the story was pretty foolish. She
Yeah.
wanted to do it. She was willing.
For him to coin it as a wise woman,
Yes.
because women were not really seen as wise.
Yeah. All right. So in verse 19, then.
Pastor Paul, just a quick question. Why is
Joab.
Why is Joab?
Why is he bothering with it?
Yeah, he's David's general.
He's the general.
But he's
why
been
is-
there forever.
But still, this is not his family.
But it's a deep friendship.
Got it. But it's not his family.
He is
Isn't he
trying
is David-
to
Yeah, but
He's
he
David's
wants
cousin.
to absolve
He's
Absalom.
David's cousin?
nephew, I think.
He's really,
I'll have to-
really involved. That's why.
Well, he is
Well, look at
related.
verse 1 of chapter 14.
Yeah.
Joab knew that the king's heart was
Yeah.
toward Absalom.
Yeah,
He wants the king to be happy.
yeah.
He's
Right.
worked for him that long.
Consider us a family if they're,
Right.
wouldn't you try?
Right.
I hear you. Yes, I hear you.
And I'm not saying that it was not a noble thing that he's trying to get his family together, but remember that David is not dealing with the sin of his family.
Right.
He's overlooking this because 2 years have gone by and he hasn't done anything about this.
Right.
About a murderer in his own family. His own son has murdered somebody and he hasn't done anything.
Yeah.
Inactivity. Now you may say, yeah, but it's his son, and how can he? Listen, he's supposed to be just, isn't he?
Well, it was like 2 years that he did nothing when Tamar got raped.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah, there you go.
That's right.
yeah.
Yeah. So maybe he's busy with everything else, having to run a country and fight wars. But listen,
It's on back
busy
so
too.
far back.
right? And I told you that story last week, and I'm not going to go over it again. But
Yeah.
when the family said to me, the father said she's not obeying me, and remember that.
Yeah.
And she said, well, you're not obeying. My question to him was, how important is your family?
Right.
Because you've got a problem here. You have a major problem of respect. And it's caused by your constant disobeying of the civil law of the land. You are disobeying the land, so how do you expect your kids to obey you? And that was my question. How important are your kids? Do you really want to honor God with your kids? And he decided yes. And that's why he left the country and went back. And, I can tell you the story later. You don't need to hear it again. Or if you haven't heard it, come talk to me.
That was an amazing story.
Yeah.
But you know what? Why didn't somebody walk up to David and say, David, how important is your family? Forget the wars. Forget the building and projects that you have. Aren't your kids important to you?
That's not the way they
Go
did it.
deal with it.
That's not the way they did it. They circumvented. They had to tell the stories.
Right.
Okay, what do you mean that's not the way they did it?
You don't see in here them coming straight to the point.
Oh.
Right.
Oh, I
He's
see
just
what you're
saying,
saying.
why didn't they?
Yeah, but I'm saying, why didn't David...
Culture.
Maybe.
Yeah, but is culture right?
No, but
If you're not raising your
that's
kids.
not our culture. That's that. If that is their culture, the way they
Yeah.
handle it,
I don't know.
You mean let the harem raise the kids or something and
I suppose.
your hands off?
Oh, sure.
But the Old Testament, Deuteronomy 6, says that you should put God's law on the doorposts of your house. They should be, whether you walk or sit or talk, you need to have God.
Yeah.
Where's David in this? That's all I'm saying.
In the Hebrew law, I mean, when they were traveling in the desert, God made it really clear
Yeah,
that you're supposed to be constantly teaching your
Right.
children.
right.
But I've seen different families have different ways of dealing with things. Like, for instance, one family I know that they're always shoving things under the rug.
Yes.
Don't let so-and-so know. Don't let anybody think, like the sign we have in our house that's a joke that says, as far as anyone knows, we're a nice, normal family. And yet, I know another, and that's a joke because our family is. But, I know another family, and I'm saying extended family.
Sure.
Another family that if there's something going on, they're right in your face about it. And we're going to bring it up. And it's not the elephant in the room. It's dealt with. And it's better to have it out in the open and
Put your boxing gloves on.
lovingly get this out
Very lovingly.
so that we,
That was way
so that it
Yeah.
can be solved. It's a problem to be solved, not something that we shove under the rug. And if it's, if it's sin, we deal with it, get it over with, boom, it's done. We don't mention it again.
Yeah.
And you don't have these animosities, and then other families that they just have these hidden animosities, or other families that run away. My way of solving things with my family is just to leave. People you meet that haven't talked to their kids in 5 or 6 years, and you go, what? You have grandkids you haven't met yet? And so every family, it seems like they have different ways of either dealing or not dealing with their issues. And I think David, because of his sin, definitely because of his sin, he wasn't going to deal with it because it pointed back at his own sin.
Yeah.
I think that's too bad, if he had taken his own sin. Yeah, I mean, he's in a bad position because he's the king of a country. And so there's some level of respect that he needs to maintain. But in terms of his family, if he'd addressed his own sin directly,
Yeah.
perhaps he would have had better results.
And I bet Joab knew that this was a brewing trouble
Yeah.
that would,
Well, he knew that David was upset and missed his son. He knew that
But it could
Absalom
be-
wanted to be home.
Yeah.
I
It could
mean,
be a threat to David at some point, and it
Yeah.
was.
well, that's true. That might have been another piece of it, is that he wanted to get Absalom home, so Absalom didn't raise an army and take over the country.
What I'm saying, Joab's in a bad spot too. He's trying to
Right.
keep these people, try to keep David on his
But
track.
these are his family members. If I had a cousin, for example, that was in that situation, and I knew that the kid wanted to be with them and they wanted to be with the kid, I would be inclined to try and intervene. I don't think I'd come up with an elaborate lie like that, but
Yeah. Well, remember what Jesus said. He said, a prophet is without honor save in his own town. Even Jesus was not listened to in his own hometown.
right.
So when you're dealing with family, it's a different dynamic. And let's just be honest, it's harder to deal with your own family than it is those outside the family. When we're talking about sin and things like that, Jesus went back to his hometown. He's the Son of God, and they don't listen to him. And he said,
Not without honor.
is not without honor save in his own town. A prophet goes home, oh, he's just the kid from around the corner. Oh, we watched him grow up. And so you discredit what he says because you know him more.
Right.
A preacher comes to town without any background, you go, wow, he can walk on water. This guy is amazing. Yeah, but you walk into your family reunion and they don't treat you that way. Oh, she's the greatest mother in the world. Well, yeah, no. We remember when she used to spank us and, she used to yell at us. And, in other words, they see all your imperfections. You see what I'm saying? Now, I'm not saying Jesus had imperfections, but they could not get past his. Anyway, think about
They
that.
saw him when he was tiny thing and
His
diapers.
humanity.
Yeah.
But,
So think about
David.
David.
Swallow clothes.
He can be the greatest king. He's judging these things, but with his own family, he doesn't. Somehow he's not getting through to these guys. And as I told you before, he's going to lose 4 of his family members. He lost the baby. He's lost Amnon. He's going to lose 2 more. Absalom is going to die, and then there's one other one. I'm just letting the cat out of the bag. Remember, you had to restore the lamb you stole 4. And since he stole another guy's wife, he's going to lose 4 of his own kids. It's not. I don't think that's coincidence, folks.
I know this is skipping ahead, but who's the 4th one?
I wrote it down. Let me.
Oh, it's not that important. It
Oh, okay.
really isn't.
Adonijah is the 4th.
Yeah, I can look it up if I.
Yeah, you'll see it. Adonijah later. All right, verse 19. Let's just finish up with these. So when the king, he's pretty smart, and he goes, okay, I've judged your situation. Now you're applying that to me so that the son who is the murderer should not be punished. Did Joab have something to do with this? And she responds, as thy soul, I'm reading verse 19. As thy soul lives, my lord the king, none can turn to the right hand or the left from aught that my lord the king has spoken. For thy servant Joab, he bade me, meaning he told me to do this. And he put all these words in my mouth. So I can see her going, oops.
Not my fault.
It's not my fault. It's somebody else, and he's around the corner. He's over there listening. She's looking out for number 1, isn't she?
Well, she has to.
But you're so smart because you're the king. You figured it out. You're
I love
such
it.
a smart
I love
man.
it.
That's what she's saying here.
Yes.
Nothing happens without you knowing. You are just amazing.
Oh, Cindy, that is great. She's turning compliments. They're just oozing out of her mouth. It's like honey dripping off her lips. Are you all seeing this here? This is like drama. This is... Oh, my goodness.
Even while she's backing away.
You know what we ought to do someday? We ought to put on a drama. We ought to do a drama for the church. We could be amazing, dressed up like... Oh, this is...
I said Shakespeare should have written.
Yeah.
You're right.
Well, David,
Would have been perfect.
get yourself a
Acquired it.
And then look at verse 20. This reinforces what Cindy said. To fetch about this form of speech hath thy servant Joab done this thing, and my Lord is wise. And according to the wisdom of an angel of God, Oh, I mean, you are amazing, David.
You are so amazing.
Oh, brother.
Surely by this time he's blushing.
So Joab can't say, you told him. She says, well, he figured it out.
Yeah, he's so wise.
All right.
Yeah.
I didn't
Not
know
my
he
fault.
figured it out.
All right. So Joab, verse 22, comes running in. See, he wasn't very far. I really believe he was standing right around the corner listening.
So too.
He had his hand like this, like, let me see. Oh, yeah. And maybe he could have been even prompting her on the things to say. Hey, you forgot this line. Say
Behind
this.
the curtain.
This is amazing stuff, folks. So Joab falls on his face. Where did he come from? Well, he's right there somewhere. And he bowed himself. You see what he's doing? He's even lavishing this praise.
Yes, this is awful. Ooh.
And then today thy servant knoweth that I have found grace in thy sight, my Lord, O King, in that the king has fulfilled the request of his servant. So Joab arose and went to Jeshurun and brought Absalom to Jerusalem. So the rest of the chapter is basically, he comes back, but David doesn't want to see his face.
Why?
He turns away. Well,
Problem.
David is conflicted here, folks,
Yeah.
because his son is a murderer. And he's had to apply what he judged for the widow to his son.
But who
And
else is a murderer?
He doesn't know what to do.
Who else is a murderer?
Yeah,
Right.
that's right.
Like
And,
father,
you
like
know,
son, like
Yeah.
son,
I
like
think
father.
that's why.
He's looking in the mirror when he sees this boy, you know.
I think that's why.
Yeah.
He may tell himself it's something else, but I think, yeah.
Yeah.
He looks in the mirror, he sees his son.
Oh,
Sees a murderer.
well, he sees himself.
So the rest of the verses there talk about this Absalom. Now, this is amazing that when his hair was 200 shekels,
Yeah.
200 shekels, I think, is about 3 pounds, something like that. 3 to 4 pounds. That's a lot of hair. That's weight.
Sure is.
So this guy must have, and it says, you know, he was beautiful. He was very handsome,
What's the name of that
top to bottom.
model with that long?
Oh, I know who you're talking about.
The man. Yeah.
Oh, I don't know.
Yes, yeah. They make jokes about him a lot. Like
Fabio.
Fabio, there we go.
Fabio? Well,
Sure,
no,
he's
no.
not that good looking anymore. He's-
Okay, so verse 28, we'll finish up. Absalom was there 2 years, and he didn't see the king's face. Now, for you not to see somebody, you have to avoid them, right? I mean, the king's around. He's leading armies. He's doing pronouncements, and he doesn't see him.
He
So
doesn't
verse,
invite him into the castle.
Yeah.
Or vice versa.
they're obviously not eating together and
Doesn't
not
go to his
having
house.
parties.
He doesn't invite him.
So David is conflicted here. He's brought them back, but they're not restored yet.
Right.
So they've been, at least they're in proximity, but they're not restored. Okay, and so Absalom sent for Joab, verse 29. Absalom, I find it interesting that Absalom is trying to take the initiative here to say, hey, Joab, can we just get together and figure out how I can talk to my dad?
Sure.
And Joab doesn't respond. So now they go and burn his field.
Yeah, that's the.
I mean, talk about chaos and confusion in the home in what's going on. So Absalom orders, right? Verse 30. He said to his servants, go burn his field. And so he burned his field. Then verse 31, Joab comes to Absalom. He showed up at the house. And he says, why have you burnt my field? And Absalom's like, oh, I'm glad you got here. It's the only way I could get you here. All right?
Yeah, because he asked him twice.
Yeah, verse 32. I sent to you, come, and that I may send thee to the king. And it's so he says in verse 32, you know, probably would have been good for me just to stay there. I mean, I'm no closer to the king now than I was in Jeshurun, right? Verse 32. Wherefore I come from Jeshurun, it had been good for me to have been there still. Now therefore let me see the king's face. If there be any iniquity in me, let him kill me. That's kind of odd. Yeah, there was iniquity in him.
Yeah.
But he says, I'm a righteous guy.
Oops.
Yeah, that's not true.
He thinks he's justified in having killed.
Yeah, he thinks he's justified for having done it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
But he still knows the law, so.
yeah.
But you gotta think, Absalom, I mean, I know he tries to take over the country, but Absalom, in a way, is a patient guy. He
Yeah.
waited for a couple years just to see if David would do anything about
Yeah, that's
the original crime.
That is dad's patience.
And then he waited,
Yeah.
in Jerusalem for another, well, he waited in the other place for 3 years, and
Yeah,
then he
sure.
waited in Jerusalem for another 2. That's a lot of waiting.
And remember, Absalom was the only one who took Tamar in. Let her stay at his house.
Okay, if you really want to read this story in modern language, it's a story from the South. You got to read Faulkner's Absalom, oh Absalom.
Oh, yeah?
Oh yeah, it's there.
Okay.
Absalom, oh, Absalom.
But you gotta like Faulkner.
Sounds like the cry that he made when he found out his son was dead, right?
Yeah.
Oh, Absalom, Absalom.
So what was the penalty for rape? It wasn't death, right?
Well, it was, it depended
Well,
on
we
whether or
went
not
back-
the woman was betrothed.
Right.
Yeah.
We went back and looked at that. For a betrothed woman, it was death. For a woman who was a virgin, it was, he had to marry her, and he was forced to provide for her. That's
Yeah, so
back
why
in the
didn't
law.
they, instead of killing him,
Right.
make him do that?
But see, it all goes back to David, because when this happened in David's house, Tamar is his daughter. He should have enforced the law, which
Right.
said
Correctly.
Amnon. Of course, Amnon's a half brother to Tamar, so that's kind of a problem there. But
I don't know if
I mean,
was
it
a
had been
problem
done in the
back
past with Abraham and others. But at least Amnon should have been punished, one way or the other. And it wasn't done.
then. And he could
So,
have made him care for Tamar the rest of her life.
right, he could have come up with an alternative,
He could have made her care for.
a little hybrid situation there, I'm sure.
On the truth,
Could
it's
he,
so
could
kind
he
of
have asked
rape.
for counsel from a prophet? See what kind of-
Oh, he could have.
There you go.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, he did that when he was making or fighting wars.
Yeah.
He would ask God, "What do I do, Lord? You know, I'm hiding in a cave. What do I do, Lord? They're coming after me. What do I?" But now we don't find him asking God very much, right? Not that he didn't. We don't know. It doesn't say he didn't pray, but we don't have any record of him going before God.
You know, it really does parallel, at least my life, because when it's a big project and I know it's coming up, it's easier for me to pray about it. But when it's personal and I'm upset, I'm just all kind of closed off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's harder to remember, oh, God will take care of me on that.
That's true. Especially if you feel somewhat responsible for whatever it is.
Yeah, you wanna hide it
Yeah.
in some way.
And
Yeah.
like Kitty was saying about the different modes, different families deal with issues differently. People deal with issues differently.
Yeah.
Some people, I know I won't mention names, but some of us, when we have a problem, we just get quiet. Some, when we have a problem, verbalize everything. It's two different ways of dealing with it. Ways one wrong and the other not? No. God works through us. So if you're a quiet kind of person, you internalize it and you just work through it and you pray thoughts to God, that's one thing. Or if you want to tell everybody in the room about your problems and get everybody to be a part of the solution, that's fine too. Okay, so, all right, so let's finish up here. Verse 33, Joab came to the king, told him, and when he had called for Absalom, he came to the king, bowed himself, his face to the ground. You know, this is short-lived, I will tell you, because Absalom forms a rebellion against the king and drives David out of Jerusalem. But right now, what's he doing? He's showing, the word is obeisance, I think it is, when you show honor. He bowed himself on his face to the ground before the king, before the king, and the king kissed Absalom. You know, if this were the end of the story right here, you would go, wow, they're restored. This is great.
Yeah.
But the story continues, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Passive aggressive.
So for now, on the surface, it looks like things are back together. But have their hearts changed? That's the key.
And that's the thing, they never, ever dealt with the issues, and that's what I think we're talking about here.
Yeah.
They didn't address it, they didn't talk about the elephant in the room.
So what are the applications for us? Well, a couple. The woman played a part. She was asked to do it. She played it well. And
But it was a lie.
but it was a lie. How many masks do we wear? How many times do we not want to reveal the true thoughts or the true feeling that we have, or whatever we put a mask on? That's a question only you can answer. You know, the Bible talks about us being genuine and honest, bearing one another's burdens, you know, that kind of thing. That's one. The other application would be, let's let God deal with our hearts. Because until it gets down to the heart level, there's no change. On the surface, there can be change, but there won't be true change unless it's from the heart. I'm right. I often said, God didn't save me to change my shirt. He saved me to change my heart. You understand what I'm saying? It shouldn't be external. It should be heart. Because if it works its way out from the inside, that's true change. Outside is just temporary. And we see that in the life of Absalom. Any other applications you can see in this?
Sorry.
What's that?
Oh, I was flipping through
Oh.
it so hard that my pages are going.
Too much wind blowing over
Looking
there?
for something.
I have one observation, is that when we have to give somebody some personally attacking news or something that's bad news, or that, like this woman from Toccoa, it does make sense. It does make sense to put it in story form, or put it in something that the person can connect to. I forget who it was. Was it Gary Smalley that wrote about arguing husband and wife, where you put it in a story?
No.
And you put what you want to say to the person in a story. Like if I, when I used to get upset with somebody in our kitchen, because we have 9 people using the same kitchen, and if I say, well, if I went into your bedroom and in your drawer and I used your things and I just threw them back in, how would you like that? Well, that's something they can picture and it relates to them. Then they can understand why we have a drawer that's organized a certain way and we want to put things back. If you can relate it to something they're familiar with, it connects.
I could see that could really help de-escalate a lot of arguments, if you can explain what you're trying to say in a story way.
But to do that, you really have to pray first. You also have to think bigger than your own narrow point of view. You
Right.
have to look through their point of view.
And you can't do it when you're still furious.
Maybe that's why it took 2 years.
You gotta come down,
Right.
and you really have
Yeah.
to understand, they are as human as you are, and they see it one way,
Right?
where you
Right.
see it another.
Right.
And you've got to respect them the way they see it.
Right. Another moral of the story I see is that, and for parenting, a lot of us are grandparents and we're giving advice or making observations of our grandkids. Maybe we should get into this conversation here, you guys. When we're giving advice to our kids about observations we make with our grandkids, we can take this parenting advice and say, look, David didn't deal with stuff, and look what happened. It festered in Absalom. It retaliated and came back at him. When the proverb says, a child left to himself brings his mother to shame, don't leave him to himself. Deal with it. Do something about that right now. I remember I was a lazy mom, and I would be around other moms with their kids, and I'd just sit back and watch the kids, because I just love to watch kids. Well, other moms will be jumping up, stop, you can't do this, and they're training their kids, and it's like, oh, I guess I better get up and stop my kids before they get the idea that they're allowed to go ahead and do that, that that's normal or acceptable behavior.
Oh, I figured that they learned through experience. I let them kill each other.
Well, there are times,
They turned out pretty good.
But see, David did let them literally kill each
Well, I
other
don't, yeah.
because he didn't do anything.
Time and place.
Yeah. But do you see what a story does? I'll just finish with this. Yeah. whenever you want to. What a story does is it gets you to look beyond your own little world. Because that's what the problem is. David is busy with his little stuff and he's not paying attention to the family and the needs out here. And he's committed a sin and he doesn't realize how that's affected everybody else. So these stories are they're expanding his understanding of things that are going on way beyond his little world. Okay, do you understand what I'm saying? And in our house, one of my famous things that I say to the grandkids, like when we have people over and we set the food out like buffet, we have these kids that'll grab a plate and take all of the one thing.
Oh.
And what we'll say is, here's what I'll say. If everyone took that much, would there be enough?
For everyone.
For everyone. In other words, one plate, it's my plate, I took all the whatever, deviled eggs. I took them all. There's not any for anybody else, but I don't care because I have my plate. But by saying, can everyone take that much? What I'm doing